Well, welcome back from lunch to our 2022 Northwestern Minnesota Synod Assembly. I hope you had a delightful lunch as we did here in the studio. We especially enjoyed having lunch with our couple of honorees. And so it's an honor now to introduce to you our keynote speaker. Caitlin Curtis is a Native American Christian author and speaker, as an enrolled member of the Potawatomi Citizen Band, and someone who has grown up in the Christian faith. Caitlin writes on the intersection of indigenous spirituality, faith in everyday life, and the life of the church. Her first book, Glory Happening, Finding the Divine in Everyday Places, was published with Paraclete Press in 2017. Her latest book, Caitlin's book, Native, Identity, Belonging, and Rediscovering God, was used by us for a big read in November of 2020, and we had over 100 people from our synod and from the Northeastern Minnesota Synod together studying this book and learning from her insights and experiences as an author and as a Christian. Caitlin has contributed to On Being, Religion News Service, USA Today, and Sojourners, among others, and she was interviewed for a New Yorker article on colonization within Christian missions. In 2018, she was featured in a documentary with CBS called Race, Religion, and Resistance, speaking on the dangers of colonized Christianity. Caitlin travels around the country. In fact, today she's doing double duty. She's coming at us with a video presentation from Denver, and then will be present later in this plenary for a live Q&A with us. And so I'm delighted to present to you our keynote speaker, Caitlin Curtis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad I could be here virtually with you all for this gathering, and I'm excited to hang out with you after this talk live and have some Q&A and just share with one another. So thank you for having me. Today's talk is called What the World Needs Now, and it's kind of sparked from a question that has meant a lot to me over the last few months. And that question is this: the world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? The world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? In the last season of the hit television crime series Criminal Minds, Detective Spencer Reed is having a dream. And in that liminal space, he meets Maeve, a woman that he loved for years before who died. So at one point, Spencer's struggling with whether or not to wake up. And Maeve says to him those words I just shared with you. The world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? Something happens when we do what we love. Somehow it heals, and it heals not just us, but those around us. As I've written before and will continue to write, even our self-care isn't meant for selfish reasons. We care for ourselves so we can better care for others. That's part of being human. It's part of what matters. It ties us to our identity as kin to one another. So I want to share a little bit about 3 things that I love along this line, about how, what the world needs now truly is love, just like that song by Jackie DeShannon. And I'll lead us to asking what this means for us to move toward love together. But I like to open my talks with some poetry because I put poems in my books, and that's kind of just as a space to breathe, to stop and breathe. So I want to do that here with us right now. So just stop, take a deep breath. I want to read you a poem. Before there was everything, there was nothing. But before there was nothing, there was something other, unbound, beyond, above, mystery. No one could grasp it then, and no one can grasp it now, not even with these realities coming among us and creating something new day in and day out, despite our dry and weary bones. Because before us, there was everything. And before everything, nothing was something. Something was the beginning. And we are just dust from its long, flowing robe. So before we go straight into talking about the work of love, I just want to tell you a bit about my work and who I am. All of my writing draws on the importance of storytelling in our society. So I published my first book in 2017. It's called Glory Happening, Finding the Divine in Everyday Places. And it's a book on exactly that. It's just essays and prayers from my life, processing identity and faith, and being a parent, and asking deep questions that I had never asked before or have been asking for a while, And so that was my first book. And then my second was Native. And, when I wrote Native, I was, hoping to examine what it means to practice collective belonging, and also asking this question: what does it mean to begin again in the face of a future that feels so unsure? And so Native was broken up into sections, and they were like beginnings, searching for meaning, the struggle for truth, working, bearing fruit in a new world. And it was based on the Potawatomi flood story, and which is a part of my culture, a part of my people. It's just a guide that sort of takes us through this process of asking who we are, searching, right? Struggling for that truth, working to honor that place in the world, and then seeing some new world emerge inside us and outside of us. So my book Native came out in the middle of COVID, actually toward the beginning in May of 2020. And I believe that the flood story, that story in the book, led by the book, really speaks to this time that we are still finding ourselves in. It speaks to the inequities that have been brought up by COVID. It speaks to these difficult conversations, right? In the story, in this flood story, you have original man and these animals, and they have been, grieving. They have been grieving that they have lost their world as they knew it. They have lost maybe the sense of who Creator is, and how they connect to Creator and to each other. And so eventually they decide, like, we need to begin again. We need to do something. And the animals work together with original man, and eventually Muskrat saves the day and brings up some dirt from the bottom of the water so that they can put that dirt on the turtle's back and begin again. And so it's this beautiful story of dreaming and kinship and belonging and trusting one another to ask what might be. And I think that's such a beautiful image of what we are doing right now all over the world in so many spaces. So what does it mean to begin, right? I think that's always an important place to ground ourselves, to ask this question. So I want to read you a little bit of something from Native. No matter who we are or where we come from, we are people who journey. We long for community. We long for oneness with the sacred. We long to be seen and known, and to see and know the world around us. Part of the human journey is knowing what it means to grieve, to celebrate, to get lost and be found again and again. If it weren't so, we wouldn't be human. To be human is to know the journey of transformation, to know what it means to change and become, and often to step back into who we were before. In my life, journeying has meant telling the truth, coming to terms with trauma in my own story, and leaning into the trauma and pain of others with an honest listening, so that together we learn how to be people who walk alongside one another in order to heal. These words are still really important for me today, these words that I wrote in my book, especially that last part when I say that we are leaning into the trauma and pain of others with honest listening, so that together we learn how to be people who walk alongside one another in order to heal. We have to figure out how to be honest about what it means to search for the truth, right? We are living in an America, in a world, but in an America that is coming to terms with who we are, and it's not always a pretty process. It's painful, right? To be human is to transform. So what about our sort of collective consciousness, right? Can we transform together? Can we journey together in order to heal? We have to be honest about our stories, about our trauma, about our collective stories, our collective wounds, right? I love this quote by William Wordsworth. It simply says, to begin, begin. To begin, begin. And I write this in the introduction of Native. We start at the beginning. We ask questions along the way. We arrive at ourselves. Mystery is always there. And then we start all over again. So I want us to understand that Contrary to what we are often taught to believe, life is not just a series of beginnings and endings on this straight timeline. We live in cycles, right? We live in cycles of seasons of life, of death, of birth, of rebirth. So you're all here gathering together right now because you believe in the power of community and storytelling. From the land that you live on to the people you care for, your communities, those that you interact with on a daily basis. Think about them for a moment. Think about what they have meant to you in different seasons of your life, what community, what care means to you right now. The cycles of my life have been, led by seasons of trauma, sometimes seasons of assimilation and pain, and I write about that in my book. But also seasons of beautiful community, of healing and solidarity, which I also write about in both of my books that I've published. My own journey of beginning, of asking questions, of grieving and holding gratitude, often all at once, right? We can do that. We can hold grief, we can hold gratitude all at once. And that those spaces, that liminal space that I call it, is what leads me here to these spaces with all of you. We're asking these questions, and we're asking that big question that Maeve asked in Criminal Minds. The world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? So I want to share 3 things that I love. So the first thing I'll talk about is I love storytelling. The second thing, I love solidarity work. And number 3, I love curiosity. So first we'll start with storytelling. Why do I love storytelling? I want to talk about why storytelling is important, how it ties into these examinations of our beginnings and our identities, right? I love definitions. So this is the definition of a story, of the word story. It is an account of past events in someone's life or in the evolution of something. An account of past events in someone's life or in the evolution of something. So there are 2 ways in which storytelling is really important. 1, we're telling our own story, right? And then 2, we're telling a collective story, a story that we are a part of, right? One part of that whole. I love that definition. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad I could be here virtually with you all for this gathering, and I'm excited to hang out with you after this talk live and have some Q&A and just share with one another. So thank you for having me. Today's talk is called What the World Needs Now, and it's kind of sparked from a question that has meant a lot to me over the last few months. And that question is this: the world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? The world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? In the last season of the hit television crime series Criminal Minds, Detective Spencer Reed is having a dream. And in that liminal space, he meets Maeve, a woman that he loved for years before who died. So at one point, Spencer's struggling with whether or not to wake up. And Maeve says to him those words I just shared with you. The world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? Something happens when we do what we love. Somehow it heals, and it heals not just us, but those around us. As I've written before and will continue to write, even our self-care isn't meant for selfish reasons. We care for ourselves so we can better care for others. That's part of being human. It's part of what matters. It ties us to our identity as kin to one another. So I want to share a little bit about 3 things that I love along this line, about how, what the world needs now truly is love, just like that song by Jackie DeShannon. And I'll lead us to asking what this means for us to move toward love together. But I like to open my talks with some poetry because I put poems in my books, and that's kind of just as a space to breathe, to stop and breathe. So I want to do that here with us right now. So just stop, take a deep breath. I want to read you a poem. Before there was everything, there was nothing. But before there was nothing, there was something other, unbound, beyond, above, mystery. No one could grasp it then, and no one can grasp it now, not even with these realities coming among us and creating something new day in and day out, despite our dry and weary bones. Because before us, there was everything. And before everything, nothing was something. Something was the beginning. And we are just dust from its long, flowing robe. So before we go straight into talking about the work of love, I just want to tell you a bit about my work and who I am. All of my writing draws on the importance of storytelling in our society. So I published my first book in 2017. It's called Glory Happening, Finding the Divine in Everyday Places. And it's a book on exactly that. It's just essays and prayers from my life, processing identity and faith, and being a parent, and asking deep questions that I had never asked before or have been asking for a while, And so that was my first book. And then my second was Native. And, when I wrote Native, I was, hoping to examine what it means to practice collective belonging, and also asking this question: what does it mean to begin again in the face of a future that feels so unsure? And so Native was broken up into sections, and they were like beginnings, searching for meaning, the struggle for truth, working, bearing fruit in a new world. And it was based on the Potawatomi flood story, and which is a part of my culture, a part of my people. It's just a guide that sort of takes us through this process of asking who we are, searching, right? Struggling for that truth, working to honor that place in the world, and then seeing some new world emerge inside us and outside of us. So my book Native came out in the middle of COVID, actually toward the beginning in May of 2020. And I believe that the flood story, that story in the book, led by the book, really speaks to this time that we are still finding ourselves in. It speaks to the inequities that have been brought up by COVID. It speaks to these difficult conversations, right? In the story, in this flood story, you have original man and these animals, and they have been, grieving. They have been grieving that they have lost their world as they knew it. They have lost maybe the sense of who Creator is, and how they connect to Creator and to each other. And so eventually they decide, like, we need to begin again. We need to do something. And the animals work together with original man, and eventually Muskrat saves the day and brings up some dirt from the bottom of the water so that they can put that dirt on the turtle's back and begin again. And so it's this beautiful story of dreaming and kinship and belonging and trusting one another to ask what might be. And I think that's such a beautiful image of what we are doing right now all over the world in so many spaces. So what does it mean to begin, right? I think that's always an important place to ground ourselves, to ask this question. So I want to read you a little bit of something from Native. No matter who we are or where we come from, we are people who journey. We long for community. We long for oneness with the sacred. We long to be seen and known, and to see and know the world around us. Part of the human journey is knowing what it means to grieve, to celebrate, to get lost and be found again and again. If it weren't so, we wouldn't be human. To be human is to know the journey of transformation, to know what it means to change and become, and often to step back into who we were before. In my life, journeying has meant telling the truth, coming to terms with trauma in my own story, and leaning into the trauma and pain of others with an honest listening, so that together we learn how to be people who walk alongside one another in order to heal. These words are still really important for me today, these words that I wrote in my book, especially that last part when I say that we are leaning into the trauma and pain of others with honest listening, so that together we learn how to be people who walk alongside one another in order to heal. We have to figure out how to be honest about what it means to search for the truth, right? We are living in an America, in a world, but in an America that is coming to terms with who we are. And it's not always a pretty process. It's painful, right? To be human is to transform. So what about our sort of collective consciousness, right? Can we transform together? Can we journey together in order to heal? We have to be honest about our stories, about our trauma, about our collective stories, our collective wounds, right? I love this quote by William Wordsworth. It simply says, to begin, begin. To begin, begin. And I write this in the introduction of Native. We start at the beginning, We ask questions along the way. We arrive at ourselves. Mystery is always there. And then we start all over again. So I want us to understand that contrary to what we are often taught to believe, life is not just a series of beginnings and endings on this straight timeline. We live in cycles, right? We live in cycles of seasons of life, of death, of birth, of rebirth. So you're all here gathering together right now because you believe in the power of community and storytelling. From the land that you live on to the people you care for, your communities, those that you interact with on a daily basis. Think about them for a moment. Think about what they have meant to you in different seasons of your life, what community, what care means to you right now. The cycles of my life have been, led by seasons of trauma, sometimes seasons of assimilation and pain, and I write about that in my book. But also seasons of beautiful community, of healing and solidarity, which I also write about in both of my books that I've published. My own journey of beginning, of asking questions, of grieving and holding gratitude, often all at once, right? We can do that. We can hold grief, we can hold gratitude all at once. And that those spaces, that liminal space that I call it, is what leads me here to these spaces with all of you. We're asking these questions, and we're asking that big question that Maeve asked in Criminal Minds. The world needs you to do what you love. Have you done that? So I want to share 3 things that I love. So the first thing I'll talk about is I love storytelling. The second thing, I love solidarity work. And number 3, I love curiosity. So first we'll start with storytelling. Why do I love storytelling? I want to talk about why storytelling is important, how it ties into these examinations of our beginnings and our identities, right? I love definitions. So this is the definition of a story, of the word story. It is an account of past events in someone's life or in the evolution of something. An account of past events in someone's life or in the evolution of something. So there are 2 ways in which storytelling is really important. 1, we're telling our own story, right? And then 2, we're telling a collective story, a story that we are a part of, right? One part of that whole. I love that definition of the word story because it speaks to our capability of evolving, right? The ways in which we're transforming in our lives throughout time and cultures. We have used stories to remember. We've used stories to sort of send future generations on with hope and courage. I want to read you a poem. I have something called the Liminality Journal, which is a wonderful online space that I have really loved sharing some original poetry and essays there, and would love for you to join me there if you would like. Throughout May, we have been doing daily poetry prompts, and so one day the poem prompt was the word transformation, and I just want to read you what I wrote that day. I want to just slip in another poem here as we keep going. Oh, we love a dramatic transformation, don't we? We love to see the makeovers, the houses getting gutted and redesigned, the sinful soul become clean. But that's not often the way transformation works. Often it's a steady, slow unfolding. It's moment by moment movements, tiny increments that lead to something. I often don't know I'm in the midst of a transformation until I see myself somewhere with someone doing something and I'm hit by the bigness of it all. We do love a dramatic story, but can't we also be drawn to the slow and steady surrender? Can't we also be drawn to the ways we are changing, even when we don't understand it? I want a transformation that won't burn out, that will guide me through this life. I want a headstone that reads, "She kept transforming, and that was the gift of it all." So over the last few years, storytelling, transformation, this idea of transforming and evolving, it has become really sacred work for me, this sacred work of telling the truth of my own story. And I wonder if it's been the same for any of you, if something has sparked this digging in to your own story. For me, I had to tell the truth that I was born into a mixed culture family. I have white and indigenous parents. I'm of European descent and Potawatomi descent. I grew up in a Christian home. The stories that I told growing up often rooted me in this faith, that left me feeling not enough a lot of the time, constantly wondering how I would be punished by this punitive God that wouldn't want my mess ups. That's what I was telling myself. I was telling a story that I was mostly a sinner and not much else. I was telling a story that being Potawatomi isn't important. But as an adult, I'm looking into the stories of my people. So I know who we are. So I know where we come from, that we are the people of the Great Lakes region. We are the people of the place of fire, the Potawatomi and Tao. When I began telling that part of my story, learning our stories, I began learning for myself what it means to be me. I began to transform, to evolve, to listen to parts of myself that had been shut off for a long time. I began to understand what it means to face my trauma and my pain and my healing, right? Healing is messy. It's beautiful. It's not easy. It's everything. Healing is such a complex thing. And so that's part of my story, my beginnings, these pieces of what I write about in my books and in my poems. These are the stories I come and tell to folks like you because our stories connect us, right? And you all know this. Even when our stories are riddled with trauma or pain, we take our stories and we're weaving them into this masterpiece that others enter into, right? It's like a mirror. Our stories hold each other's stories, and that's a beautiful gift. So here's the important thing to consider, even about our own story, right? What are our stories rooted in? Are our stories rooted in love and solidarity and connectedness? Are they rooted in hate or shame? Are our stories plagued with things like colonization and white supremacy? If we live in America in many places, the answer to that last one is yes. Our stories are plagued with systems of colonization and white supremacy. So just as we remember our own creation story, right, we also have to remember the creation story of America, of this land that was built on the backs of Indigenous and Black bodies, the America that has abused some and upheld the sure success of others. So even our personal narratives have been affected, right, by systems of whiteness or hate. So our work, this beautiful work that we get to do, is to own those stories, to understand those stories. How do they affect us inside ourselves? This is where that hard work begins. But this is the work that I love. Our storytelling, it involves deconstructing. It involves examining these systems that we have grown up in. And I know it can be scary, but it's also liberating and beautiful. It connects us to one another on a deeper level. I think about something I love in my culture, which is our 7 grandfather teachings. They're sort of these central tenets of our tribe, of our culture. They're things like humility, honesty, wisdom, bravery, truth, respect, and love. So through these teachings, we work out the meaning of our identity, right? We ask who we are on this earth. What are we doing? How do we care for each other and ourselves? We're taught to carry these gifts in the right way, right? We're carrying them inside of us with the right heart. We're honoring this earth. We're honoring her creatures and the people we encounter along the way. And the deeper I lean into these teachings and these stories, the more I find this interconnectedness among different cultures, different religions and faiths all over the world. Our work as humans is to call each other home, to call to one another's spirits and say, this is for you. This is what it means to be human, to love and be loved. Let's learn from one another as we go. So I want to ask, what teachings do you hold on to? What words have sort of led you throughout your life, have anchored you to your soul, to your story, to your own way in this world, to community? Just think about that for a moment. What stories and teachings are really important to you? Maybe jot those down somewhere soon. Hang it up somewhere so that you remember that grounding, that connectedness. I believe that it matters that we live a holistic life. We engage in a holistic faith. So I cannot compartmentalize or separate out the various parts of who I am or what I believe. I did that for a long time and it didn't work, right? It means that journeying must include all of me, all of who I am. And then beyond that, my journey must include all of us, right? It's that connection to each other. If we all engage in this way of belief for ourselves and those around us, we would notice God in our midst, the sacred in our midst. We would see that the Spirit is one of inclusion within our cultural boundaries, the ways we're different, but also one who calls us to so much more outside of that, to see the lives and experiences of others as beautiful and necessary aspects of our collective wholeness. So this means we tell stories from the ones who are forgotten. Resisting hate within our families and communities means that we choose to tell a better story. We choose to tell the true story, right? We know that Jesus was a storyteller. That's no secret. Jesus came and told a different kind of story. His parables tended to sort of turn things upside down, right? Make sense of things that no one was expecting. He would teach people to look in the opposite direction that everyone was searching for meaning in. Jesus confused people. Jesus was a storyteller. Jesus spoke to the communities of people that surrounded him with stories that brought the small and the forgotten and the oppressed right to the center. That's how communities are transformed. That's how we are transformed. We have to ask ourselves whose voices we have centered. Voices of whiteness, voices of patriarchy, voices of hate and greed. Can we dig deep and center voices of the prophets of our time? Pay attention to those who have been ignored. Author Barbara A. Holmes has an incredible book that I encourage you to get called Race and the Cosmos. And this is what she writes in this book. We are participating in ways that support systems of oppression. The strength to walk away, to make those radical changes and commitments cannot come until we understand who we are and why we are so deluded by the myths that we help to create. To make those radical changes and commitments cannot come until we understand who we are and why we are so deluded by the myths that we help to create. This is a moment we find ourselves in today. This is facing the truth of who we are as individuals, of who we are as a nation of oppressive institutions, talking about how America's story is complicated. We are often portrayed as a land of freedom and democracy, and for many it is. But for many Indigenous and Black communities, those are different experiences. Take the Potawatomi word for America. It's Chimokmankik, which translates to the land of the long knives. So our very narrative for America, our very word for not the land that we're on, but the institution created on the land. It's a nation of institutions born in violence. And we carry that as part of our story, and that's powerful. That's a powerful image. Our stories matter. The stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell about each other. Can we speak the truth in our stories and open ourselves up to a new kind of love in the process? Can we trust the prophets and the truth tellers of our day to lead us? I hope so, but it begins with us. Here's one more reading from Native. We believe that God is one of a kind, but beyond that, we can't name who or what God is exactly. Mystery, other, sometimes father, sometimes mother, sometimes neither, sometimes friend, sometimes challenger. When we begin to name God, we find that God has suddenly become an image of us, of our cultural understandings. The conversations begin with where and how things were created, what the environment looked and smelled like, who was present, how Adam got to name the animals, or why the turtle was the chosen one to create land from the shell on his back. So we rest there, and we take in the reality that whatever was used to create the world, the Big Bang, the little spark, a breath, a snap of the fingers, the spit, and the dirt, it began in the most sacred place. Our creativity comes from the creative energy within that mystery. Through that, we have life today, a constant beginning. And that beginning leads us throughout our lives, through every adventure, every misstep, every celebration. Returning to our collective and personal creation narratives means asking difficult but essential questions about what we're doing on this earth. I think that trees have a lot to teach us about what it means to be kin and what it means to honor the work of creation. I'm reminded of the idea behind Peter Volhaben's book, The Hidden Life of Trees. Trees have social networks. Their roots are connected to one another, literally, and they support each other through sickness and health. Their well-being depends on their community. So when the supposedly feeble trees disappear, the others lose as well. Trees demonstrate community for us. They understand what it means to care for one another, to care for the whole as they care for themselves. So as humans, we are connected at our root base. And in our struggle to learn what it means to be human to one another and to care for this created world, we are constantly exchanging experiences with one another, good medicine with each other, stories and relationships that are born from the deep well of God. But sometimes we forsake that sacred knowledge, and instead we trade violence and oppression and fear with each other. So on one hand, healing begets healing and community begets community. But on the other hand, oppression begets oppression and hate begets hate. So we must choose what kind of people we want to be for the sake of all of us. That means that our cultures must be intermingled in these relationships, even from the very beginnings of who we are, because we are responsible to and for one another and responsible to our faith traditions, whatever they may be. So today, let's invest in our stories, in our beginnings. So that is why I love the work of storytelling. That's a bit on storytelling. The stories we tell about ourselves, each other. Number 2, I love solidarity work. I love solidarity work. What is solidarity and why is it important? The definition of solidarity is unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest, mutual support within a group. In 2022, what is our solidarity rooted in? What is the most common interest that we are trying to get to? Is it that Black Lives Matter? Is it that America needs to face its own history? Is our humanity our common ground? Is our belief in God what brings us together? So I want to stop for a moment. I want to pause and talk about decolonization as a tool for dreaming, as a tool for imagining a better way forward. When COVID began happening, so much of the world was catching up to what disabled and immunocompromised people were saying, warning us of its dangers, right? And we began to understand that the world was not going to be as it was before. And so my book, Native, was being released into that COVID world where these hard truths were coming to the surface. And I realized that my book was being released right when it needed to be. The world needed to be reminded of a flood story. We needed to hear about the animals and original man. Remember the story I told you? Doing what they could do in kinship to create a new beginning in a world that was scary and unknown for them. We all needed to be reminded that the stories of the oppressed matter, that they always will. We needed to be reminded of the importance of community. So decolonization, which I write about in a lot of my writing in Native, it's literally referred to as a state withdrawing from a colony. That's the definition, the literal, especially academic definition. But decolonization is also a very daily, personal, spiritual act. And so I use decolonization as an everyday tool in leading people to examine the colonial systems they've been a part of and how they might envision breaking down colonization around them. Where are we noticing colonization and what we learned in school and how we're taught history, right? We can decolonize some of these things as we listen to Indigenous people. So as we think about this, how do we widen our understanding of what it means to be human? How do we practice solidarity? How can we decolonize our communities, our homes, the books we read, the things we watch, or the people we listen to? Can we listen to those voices, right, that have been marginalized, like I mentioned earlier? And in doing that, can we change ourselves and have this ripple effect of change, of making the world a better, more just, more equitable place? There's something that Indian author Arundhati Roy wrote, maybe right in 2020 or 2021 maybe. I think in 2020, and when I read it, I just held on to it. I have shared it with so many people, and I want to read it to you. Whatever it is, coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality, trying to stitch our future to our past and refusing to acknowledge the rupture. But the rupture exists. And in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So solidarity work is really about dreaming with one another of a better world and asking what it will take to get there. I know you have had these kinds of conversations with other people where you're dreaming, you're asking what comes next, you're asking how you can belong to one another, how you can hold that space with each other. That's what we're doing today too. That's what we do when we gather. We dream and we practice solidarity. So what does it mean to practice solidarity with those who are different than you are? For Indigenous communities that are nearby, it means listening, reading books by Indigenous authors, maybe giving money to the tribe so that they can care for their own people, gaining trust. Solidarity is fighting the assumption that we know better because we are Christians. Paying attention to that helps us create a safer and better world. So when I think about the work of dreaming, I think about a fire burning. Keeping a fire burning is important work. Like I shared with you earlier, right, that we are the people of the place of fire, the Potawatomi and Tao. I love this quote I found by Rumi a few years ago. It says, "Stay in the spiritual fire, let it cook you." Stay in the spiritual fire, let it cook you. So the long haul work of justice, of solidarity, of making things right in a world where things have gone wrong, the work of decolonization, it is work that lasts throughout the centuries. It is the work of keeping the fire burning, of letting it cook us. We must recognize that the dreams we work toward probably won't be realized while we are still alive. You know, they may be way far down the road and we may not even see them come to fruition. So the work of solidarity is maybe just to realize that our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, our foster kids, our students, they are the ones who are going to carry this work forward. This work that we could only hope to finish, they are the ones who will realize the dreams of God in a hurting world. So the question is how? We do it through the work of solidarity. We do it by asking that question deep down, honestly. What is it that you love to do in the world? And then you do it. And then you make room for others. You support others who also are trying to do what they love to do in the world. That is how solidarity works, how dreams come true, how a new world is born and is being born every single day. Author Tempest Williams writes this, "By paying attention to what is real and true and authentic, we come home to ourselves, the person we want to become." And when that happens, healing happens, dreams happen, solidarity happens. Our solidarity is also rooted in our relationship to the earth. And I know that that's important for many of you as well. I want to read you something from Native about this connection between future generations and the earth and this work that we long to do together. "I know that for the Potawatomi spirit to continue to burn brightly, our children must carry the flame into the next generation, and that if we let them, they will. But we must listen to the quiet and steady voice of the earth to guide us, standing in solidarity with one another as we do so. We must hear the creatures that have inhabited these spaces since the beginning of time. We must remember that they are our teachers, or we will never learn anything about ourselves. If it is not because of a pipeline, it will be because of something else, some other threat to the very life of Sugamakwe. So the work of the people, the organic, grassroots, feet on the ground work cannot come just from the indigenous people of the land. It must reach across cultures, socioeconomic status, skin color. We must all work together, native and non-native, to fulfill these prophecies that call people back to unity, that call healing back over the land, that listen to her as she tells us that though she is sore, she is still speaking, that though she is bruised, she will still wake us up and heal us. So this leads me to the third thing that I love and that I believe the world desperately needs. I love curiosity. In the evenings before my kids go to bed, we often have a nighttime ritual of reflection. So I settle them in, we take a few deep breaths, and then we have a quiet meditation. And one of my favorites is asking them to imagine their safe place, to imagine a place where they feel totally themselves, totally free, totally taken care of. And I know this meditation works because when COVID anxiety and burnout were at their worst for me, I used this every night. When I couldn't sleep, I would take myself to my safe place and I would stay there until I could sleep again. And even during the day, when I feel uneasy or I feel my anxiety rising, I go there again. I go to safety. But what worked for me worked for my kids, because all of us need a safe place where we can be free, where we can hold space for who we are. It's important, and our curiosity is a part of that. It's important that we connect to our child selves. This is a practice that my friend Ruthie Lindsay does so well. Ruthie has pictures of her child self around her home. She has these pictures that she carries with her, that she speaks to, that she practices loving. There is something so healing about reconnecting with our child selves regularly, right? It's healing on a level we probably can't even explain, but it opens up this love and curiosity in us, and it helps us to bravely ask and speak to really difficult questions. So what we also learn from our child selves is that value of curiosity. Did you have moments when you were young, moments where you felt totally secure and connected with something in nature? Even if it was an acorn, maybe it was just an acorn or an ant, or even if you weren't outside, you were just staring out a window, having a really sacred moment. I remember moments like this when I was young, playing with grasshoppers, singing as the wind blew, imagining myself connected to God in this holy and personal way. But I think sometimes as we get older, as we learn the ways of society, a society that thinks the land is sort of a product or something to be traded and bought, we lose that curiosity. I want to read you a poem based on the prompt of the word curiosity that speaks to what I'm sharing with you. As young children, we are told to be curious. Touch this, ask questions, wonder how it works, discover every possibility. So we touch it, we ask, we wonder, we discover. And all of a sudden we are told to stop being curious because the time for checkbooks and stock market value has arrived. Now we trade curiosity for assurance. We become wise in the world or cynical, realists, never curious though. No, we've outgrown that. As adults, some of us return to the childlike ways, but it's hard. It makes us look weak in a world of checkbooks and stock markets. We look weak if we marvel at an anthill or sit beneath a wise tree or cry over a bouquet of flowers or dance in the rain. As adults, we find our curiosity hidden where the child in us is hidden. Behind all those questions, behind the pressure to become an adult too soon or too fast. We find the child in us and they hand us a small box. And when we open it, sparks fly, and we try to grab them as they turn to butterflies and lead us gently, quietly, proudly home. You know, the longer I grew up in the Baptist church, I came to see myself as someone who had dominion over the earth. It wasn't rooted in a relationship of humility or kinship. I had never heard of that. So now as an adult, I'm longing for a return to that curiosity. I have to unlearn so many things, right? One of my favorite church seasons is Lent. Those 40 days before Easter in which we remember that we come from dust and we return to that dust. The Potawatomi word for earth or dirt is aki. And it speaks to this same idea that we are made from earth, we are made from dirt. This is a universal belief, and it's not just that this idea belongs to the church. Growing up, I had never heard of Lent, so it's not even in all parts of the church. As an adult, I've learned that it's this sacred time in which we are brought into a space of wilderness. We ask who we are. We ask where we're headed. When you live on the outside, you know these liminal spaces, these in-between spaces, the thin places, if you've heard of that, where you feel the physical and spiritual intertwine. I believe that's what Jesus' life was marked by. As Richard Rohr writes, people who empty themselves in the wilderness always meet a God who is greater than they would have dared to hope. It is what Indigenous people find when we pray and listen and engage. It is what people who long for sacredness find when they take the time to listen. So in 2019 for Lent, I decided to just spend more intentional time outside. So I went to our backyard, I touched the trees, I gazed out windows more often. I sat still because I knew that I should. I remembered in that space my dust to dustness once again, and I remembered what it means to pray. We pray because the creatures of the earth teach us how to pray. We lament because creation laments, and we must work to fix what we've been a part of breaking. We repair because God is always repairing. We decolonize because it always is a return to the kindness of mystery, a return to curiosity. It is also a return to asking hard questions, to making room for the work of forging a new path. My friend Rachel Held Evans once wrote, "The prophet's voice is routinely dismissed as too critical, but she always challenges from a place of deep love for her community." She's commenting on that important piece of stepping into the church or into whatever community we're a part of, right? When we step into it, we make room for change. And that wisdom to bring that change is often born in the wilderness, in the darkness, in our grief, in the liminal space, right? We bring up hard things like our history. We challenge ourselves. We make things better for future generations. This is the way it is to be human, to live and know that our life is a part of that kind of pendulum of who came before us and who comes after us. So the earth leads us, the water leads us, and we are bearing fruit for a better world, right? We're leading one another. It looks like the fruit of love, of doing what you love, right? It is embodied acts of storytelling, solidarity, curiosity, these things I've been talking about. So do me a favor, in the coming weeks, take some time to spend outside if you can. Find a comfortable spot under a large tree, still yourself, watch an ant colony at work, find some water, and just watch its glossy skin moving in front of you. Stare out a window for a while. Ask questions. Ask questions of yourself, of God, of the land. Speak to Sugamokwe, Mother Earth, and begin to investigate how you can repair your relationship to the land. The more we restore our relationship to land, the more that we restore our relationship to ourselves and each other. It is a key part of our journey as humans. When our relationships are restored, what happens? Love. Love is what happens when we restore our relationships to each other. So how do we move toward love together? Perhaps we do it by considering that this work is holy. The questions, trusting ourselves, reaching for one another, telling the truth, letting our curiosity bring us to ourselves and to each other and to the earth. That's where love is. There's something important about the micro and the macro embodiment of all this. You know, those small moments of meditating, of listening, of learning, of paying attention. They all matter. And then we have these macro moments, the movements of people and communities, right? Engaging with institutions and systems. When we ask ourselves what it is we love, and if we have given that gift to the world, let's also ask how those gifts show up. What is your gift and how is it showing up? How is your gift showing up in the small moments? How is it showing up in the grand scheme of things? May we be willing to pay attention to love when it shows up. I want to end our time together with a new poem of mine as a sending off as we go. And I want to thank you again for having me in this space with all of you. Just take a breath. To the tender call of letting go, I give not an answer, but a breath. A steady in and out to admit and accept that all that is required here is presence and not sureness. To the tender call of falling, I close my eyes and open my hands, palms up, thoughts spanning the fullness of living and breathing the depths of everything that lives and loves. To the tender call of believing, I claim not ideology, but thisness, the presence and heartbeat of a body, mind, and spirit that always seek. And to the tender call of embracing, I simply abandon, strip bare, forsake, so that all that is left, I am fully known and fully held in what I do not know. That the letting go, the falling, the believing, the embracing is in itself all that living gives, from the sunrise to the sunset of every created day, every created moment, every created opportunity, a glimpse of presence and eternity embodied in this body, embodied in love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. That was absolutely wonderful. You speak in poetry. You say what we feel. You say what we know or think we know, but you did it so beautifully. For those of you who would like to ask questions, we ask that you write them down and hold them, because we'll be asking her questions in about maybe a half hour. So our next item on the agenda today is a hunger table presentation, and it is being done by Linda Bartholomew, and this is another good work that we're doing here in the Synod.
Hello, it's Linda Bartholomew from Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd in Moorhead. And on behalf of our Synod's Hunger Table team, it's a privilege for me to be with you here today. Thank you for being a part of this year's Synod Assembly. I'm wondering if you've heard about the Holy Cow Award. The Synod's Hunger Table recognizes churches in the Northwest Minnesota Synod for putting their hearts and stewardship into ending hunger locally and globally by providing support through their financial gifts. The Holy Cow Award is given annually to the congregation that has given the most per baptized member in our Synod towards the ELCA World Hunger Appeal. This award is determined by reviewing the data that each congregation reports to the ELCA each year. We continue to have congregations in our Synod who seriously go above and beyond. Today, we want to recognize two congregations. First, a big congratulations to Emmanuel Lutheran from Wadena, who is the 2020 recipient of the Holy Cow Award. And for 2021, we are awarding this trophy to Little Norway in rural Fertile. Thank you to both Emmanuel Lutheran and Little Norway for taking the bull by the horns and giving a lot to the ELCA World Hunger Appeal. Because we're making up for the past couple years due to COVID, the trophy will reside at Emmanuel Lutheran from June to November and Little Norway from December to May 1st. Emmanuel Lutheran, you may pick up the Holy Cow Award in the Synod office. Just call ahead of time to make sure they have the trophy ready for you. And so thank you for the honor of presenting the Holy Cow Award today. It has been an utterly moving experience for me. And by the way, the feeling you get when you think you have heard these cow puns before is known as déjà vu. God's blessings to you all, and thank you for continuing to be the hands and feet of God. Have a blessed day.
And here is the actual Holy Cow Award. I think it's a step up from that cutout that was made out of wood back in the other days earlier on. So this should be a little easier to put out in the narthex of the congregation that did such good work. Our next item will be a report or a greeting from our regional gift planner. This is Pastor Keith Pearson, and I can tell you one of the real tragedies of COVID is that we've not had that kind of relationships where we recognize each other immediately. So we are very fortunate to have Keith here today.
Thank you very much. Yes, as you heard, my name is Pastor Keith Pearson. I am your ELCA Foundation Regional Gift Planner for the Synod. And on behalf of the Foundation, I bring you greetings and prayers for the faithful completion of the work of the church that's currently in your hands. The ELCA Foundation was created back in 1988 when the denomination was first formed, and our first mission was to steward the endowments or the other long-term gifts that were given in service of the church-wide expression of the church. In 1999, that mission was expanded to include the same services to all ministries, all congregations, all the various forms of the church in the ELCA. Today, the foundation is a resource to your congregation or ministry in the areas of planned giving and endowments. Endowments are essentially investments or long-term savings that produce a stream of income or stream of money that you can use to fund your ministry. These are also known as a perpetual fund, and you typically only use the interest or the growth or the accumulating value of the investment for your ministry. Endowments provide a safety net against the unexpected, a plan for the extraordinary, and a wellspring of ministry funding that never runs dry. Often these endowments start as one extraordinary gift. That gift may be a bequest given at the time of someone's passing, and such gifts are typically given out of savings or other valuable assets that represent a lifetime of work, savings, and careful planning. By placing such an extraordinary gift into an endowment, the donor is assured that their lifetime of work will not be squandered, but will go on to provide for your ministry for years and years to come. And extraordinary gifts like these are often the result of what we call planned giving. That is, a gift that takes more time, forethought, and planning than simply writing a check or reaching into your pocket for some cash. Planned gifts may include bequests that are given at the time of a person's death, but they can also be given during a person's lifetime. Planned gifts may be cash, or more often they're gifts that are given out of resources such as a retirement savings plan or real estate or securities, stocks, other valuable assets, or maybe even a life insurance policy. And as you might guess, these gifts are a bit more complicated than simply writing a check. They require planning and may have some legal or tax and other complications involved. It is part of the ELCA Foundation's work and my service to assist donors as they navigate the complexities of such gifts. For donors, my services are entirely free of charge. I have nothing to sell, and I collect no commission, and I certainly don't try to influence where the gift goes. I am simply a servant of the church here to assist donors in making their wishes complete. If you would like to learn more about endowments or planned giving, or how your ministry can benefit from them, and how you can connect with donors to encourage planned giving, please know that I'm here to help. I am a resource of the church for the work of the church in all of its forms. And you have not just me, but the full resources, experience, and expertise of the whole ELCA Foundation at your disposal. In just a moment, my contact information will come up on the screen, and you're welcome to catch my phone number, email address, that sort of thing, and reach out to me. But if you miss that, I'm also on the Synod's website. If you look under the same page where you find the other Synod staff, you'll find my contact information there as well. I thank you. I thank you for your work together in the work of the gospel, and I pray God's blessings on your work in your ministry, wherever you might be, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Pastor Keith. Keith is a key part of our mission and ministry here in northwestern Minnesota, as is the work of Lutheran Planned Giving. And he attends our weekly staff meetings and is a helpful contributor to our ministry on a month-to-month basis as well. So at this time, we will turn our attention to one of the major social writing projects that's underway for our ELC right now, which is the project on government and civic engagement. We are working together as a church now to form a social statement on government and civic engagement. And we are blessed to have the work of both Dr. Ernest Simmons and Dr. Per Anderson, now retired professors at Concordia, who are guiding our response as a synod to this work, and as well as the response of our siblings in Christ of the Eastern North Dakota Synod. Here today to speak to us is Reverend Dr. Ernest Simmons, professor of religion. He served Concordia College for 39 years before his retirement. He's served congregations in North Dakota in an interim capacity and in other ways before he came onto the staff at Concordia in 1979. He was an instructor for the Great Plains Institute of Theology, and while at Concordia, he was the instructor for the Charis Ecumenical Center, the the chair of the Religion Department from 1986 to 1989, the director of the Program on Faith and Learning from 1996 to 1999, and of the Dovery Center for Faith and Learning from 1999 to 2017. Reverend Dr. Simmons attended seminary at Luther Theological Seminary and has his doctorate from the Claremont Graduate School. And he's here with us today. Dr. Simmons.
Thank you, Bishop Tesh. Time goes by very quickly. 39 years is wonderful. And thank you for the time. I know this has been a long day already, and I will be brief. But I want to give you just a few thoughts and some information about the critical processes that the ELCA has engaged in since its very beginning. And this is the process of critical moral reflection related to the current and pressing issues of our time. The current social statement on civic engagement is the 14th social statement that the ELCA has developed since its founding in 1988. In the ELCA, congregations are understood as communities of moral deliberation. And what that means is that faith communities bring together resources of various sorts as are relevant to a particular current, important, pressing moral issue. And this has been done on various topics. And this current one was indicated and requested by the Churchwide Assembly in 2019. Community of moral deliberation comes directly out of Luther's understanding. Luther was a relational thinker. He understood that we live simultaneously in the presence of God, what he called coram Deo, and in the presence of our neighbor, coram hominibus. We live in these two simultaneous relationships. And in one of the shorter but better things that he wrote in November 1520, a treatise called The Freedom of a Christian, he indicated that Christians should serve as little Christs to their neighbor. Now, what would that mean? Of course, will depend on the time in which one lives and the social, historical, and moral circumstances that one is encountering. And so to conduct these social statements is very much in continuity with Luther's understanding of how to reflect and become little Christs to our neighbor. I'll take a moment to just read a couple of paragraphs from the overview introduction to the social statement process. More information is available on the Synod newsletter, the Northern Lights e-newsletter, under the heading of Resource Spotlight. And there will be an opportunity, which I'll refer to in a moment, next week, for you to give feedback, because one of the most important parts of the study process developing social statements is feedback from you as congregation members to let the task force members know what's on your mind. This is a direct input from congregations and from individual Christians to the task force so that they can get a feel for what the pressing issues and perspectives are of the church on whatever the issue the task force is focusing on. The ELCA is developing a social statement on government and civic engagement, the relationship of church and state, and the related matters. Social statements are the ELCA's primary documents to address significant social issues. They are intended to aid reflection and shape conscience, and to set forth the ELCA's teaching and policy on the major social issues and questions of contemporary life. ELCA social statements are teaching and policy documents that provide broad framework to assist in thinking about and discerning about social issues in the context of faith and life. Social statements also set policy for the ELCA and guide its advocacy and work as a publicly engaged church. An ELCA task force provides primary leadership for the statement's development over, get this, a 5-year process. This is no overnight task. A 5-year period using an established process of study and widespread participation in theological and moral deliberation. It must be said that the social statements are intended to guide the policy decisions of churchwide, the whole ELCA, and they're intended to be advisory to individual pastors, other rostered persons, and to congregations and individuals. They are not dictating what you should or shouldn't do. This is not a teaching magisterium, perhaps like the Roman Catholic tradition might embrace, but it is a reflective body that draws on the best teachings of the scriptures and of the Lutheran tradition and contemporary moral, scientific, social understandings of the issues to be addressed. Next week on Tuesday evening and Tuesday and Wednesday evening from 7 to 8:15, there will be nationwide listening events that are coordinated by the church-wide offices in Chicago. If you would like to register for that so that you get the link, it would be a Zoom kind of conversation like we're having our Zoom assembly today. Please go to the resource spotlight on the church-wide or the newsletter, or you can go to the church-wide website as well. Thank you so much, and I hope that you'll take advantage of this opportunity for us to participate together in one of the most pressing issues of our time. How do we, in a responsible and respectful way, even if we disagree with our neighbor, but in faith are able to reflect collectively on the most important moral issues of our time, including the relationship of faith and life and church and state. Thank you.
Don't go too far.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. Would you join me here at the podium? So, you have provided theological leadership to not only here at Concordia and the faculty and students here, but to really our whole church. Have been a leader for over 40 years now. Mm-hmm. And I'm especially grateful for your more recent work, the Entangled Trinity and Reformation Resilience, in which you call us to a deeper understanding of and rootedness in our stewardship of creation. And so I'd be honored if you would accept my coin for the authentic creativity that you show in your work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for your good work with us on this important social statement. It's very timely.
Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you. Take care. Each year, Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota presents a Servant of Christ Award to a congregation in our synod who, through their generosity and service in the community, has exemplified the values and the mission of Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota. And so it's our honor now to play the video in which that presentation is made.
Hello, I'm Patrick Twoson, President of Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. I bring you greetings from LSS, your social ministry organization, serving on behalf of the 6 synods of the ELCA in all 87 counties of our state. First, let me say thank you. Thank you for your ongoing partnership. These are especially challenging times. With your support, we are serving more people in more places than ever before. We could not have grown services and provided support to more individuals this past year without you. Congregations, donors, volunteers, and staff together are an incredible movement of 25,000 people committed to making Minnesota a better place for all people. With your help, we are excited to be moving forward on many new initiatives. For example, in Duluth, we are opening a new facility in late spring to serve children and families that will replace the Bethany Crisis Shelter. Beyond providing emergency shelter for children, we'll be expanding services at the new LSS Bethany to support families through parent support, education and coaching, behavioral health, family visitation, reunification support, and referral to community services. In Rochester, LSS has teamed up with Zumbro Lutheran Church with a new resource center there to provide meals, laundry, computers, a community connection to youth who are at risk or who are experiencing homelessness. We're proud of the new partnership with Zion Lutheran Church in Litchfield and Christ the River of Life Lutheran Church in North Minneapolis. with new kitchens in those locations that are producing meals for older adults and school-aged children. All totaled, we are producing more than 1 million meals annually through LSS Meals to support people in our communities. In Owatonna, we've also partnered with Trinity Lutheran Church to provide behavioral health and youth services in that community. Finally, you might be interested in knowing that we finalized a merger with St. Paul-based LifeTrack last summer to continue deaf and hard of hearing services to families statewide, as well as employment services and a therapeutic preschool and family visiting service in St. Paul. We are so pleased that the St. Paul Area Synod has launched a Planting Hope campaign to expand the Families Together preschool to the east side of St. Paul. Across Minnesota, this important work touches 1 in 65 Minnesotans in ways that helps them live fuller and more abundant lives. I am incredibly proud of our heroic LSS teams across the state who continue to deliver high-quality services despite the pandemic, and of the thousands of volunteers who join with us to deliver essential care to our neighbors. This movement, you, will continue to be more important than ever as we look to the future. Each year, we lift up remarkable work of congregations through our Servant of Christ Award. This award is given each year to one or more congregations in each synod that are leaders in social ministry in their community. This year, we're honored to present the 2022 Servant of Christ Award to St. Paulie Lutheran Church in Thief River Falls in the Northwestern Minnesota Synod. Generosity is a social fabric of St. Paulie Lutheran Church. For almost 40 years, they have hosted a fall turkey supper with proceeds given to mission partners to care for their neighbors. When the turkey supper was discontinued, this small, dedicated church found a way to continue doing social outreach by providing community fall events, a free will offering, and remarkable hospitality. Since the start of the pandemic, members have given generously to support social ministry organizations, including LSS. In fact, this small church generously tithes 22% of its budget to support social service organizations locally, regionally, and internationally that provide vital support to neighbors. From quilts and prayers to food support, clothing ministry, and warm hospitality, St. Paulie Lutheran Church finds a way to bring generosity into all aspects of its mission. On behalf of Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota, thank you. Thank you for the ways you have been a powerful presence in your community to love and serve your neighbors.
Congratulations to St. Paulie and Thief River Falls on their being the recipient of the LSS Servant of Christ Award, and to Little Norway, they're in Fertile for the Hunger Award this year. So hang in there with us, folks. We're in the home stretch. Here's what we have left. I'm going to talk a little bit about the offering. We have one very brief item, but a very important item of unfinished business, which will take about 1 minute or two. We have a quick recap of the assembly and a Q&A with Caitlin Curtis, our assembly speaker, and then drawings, which you must be present to win, and finally the closing of the assembly. So we will finish, we believe, ahead of time today. So thanks for hanging in there with us. You might have noticed, we're skipping over the break for the afternoon and just proceeding right to the finish line here. So let's talk a little bit about the offering. Our Synod Easter Appeal, which has been ongoing since Easter Sunday and culminates today with our Synod Assembly, is for our partners of Lutheran disaster response, particularly for refugee resettlement efforts in Eastern Europe because of the war in Ukraine. 50% going to that need. And the other 50% will be used to make direct grants to your congregations for local ministries that you are either starting anew or continuing to support that support people experiencing poverty, either homelessness or hunger or food insecurity, and other ways in which you may choose to address poverty issues in your community. So I hope that you'll be generous by following the directions on the slide. Go to our Synod website and find ways that you can donate. Continuing on, I'm going to invite Pastor Steve Streed to come forward at this time. Hey, Steve, come on in here. Look at this guy. Oh. He's always got a huge smile on his face. Oh. He's always laughing, and such a delightful presence. You were one of the first people that came and welcomed me when I came into office back in 2019, and that was delightful. I was shocked to hear that it didn't seem possible that you had been a pastor for 48 years, and now this year you're celebrating your 50th. Anniversary of Ordination.
Hey, wow. Coming from Northwestern Seminary, I had the opportunity to serve Faith in Miltona and Esther in Parker's Prairie for 7 years, and then was called back to where I interned, Augustana and Grand Forks, for 11 years, and now started in 1990 at Eventide. Been there 32 years. I can't believe it.
I think that it's a pretty short list of people in our ELCA of pastors who are ordained 50 years and are still under a full-time call to ministry. And creativity, faithfulness, you just show all of that in your work, and I'm so thankful for you. I hope you'll accept one of my coins on behalf of all of us in the Northwestern Minnesota Synod.
Thank you.
Thank
Bishop
you, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, take care.
You bet.
Yeah. We are going to proceed now with our Q&A time with Caitlin Curtis. Caitlin, are you here with us today?
I am. Hi.
All right. Hey, good to see you. How's the conference going there in Denver, right?
No, I'm in Post Falls, Idaho.
Oh, okay. Idaho. Well, once you get west of the Rockies, we don't pay much attention. But
thank you for working with me, and I'm so glad I could still be part of your gathering. So
yeah, thank you so much. It was really inspiring, your talk this afternoon, and we're grateful that you're here with us. We do have some questions that we have received from some of our voting members of our assembly, and I have a few questions of my own if we have time to get to those, and we'll continue to welcome your questions, members of the assembly. If you have questions or comments, please do send those to the moderator, or simply indicate that you would like to ask your question, and you can unmute yourself and speak as well. Our first question, Caitlin, comes from Amber Kalina. She's a pastor up in the northern part of our synod, in the Warren community up there. And she says, in thinking about decolonization, there are some who have perceived Christianity as a colonizer religion. How do you navigate this personally, or how do you think churches can shake free of this legacy of colonization?
Oh yeah, this is a great question, and it's a question that I struggle with on a daily basis. So you're not alone. The hard thing is trying to balance what we care about and the good we want to do in the world with what we've seen throughout history. Right now in the US, we're uncovering boarding schools. We're digging into that part of our history that we have never talked about. That's not something I learned in school. Maybe some of us have, but there are things that parts of our history where Christianity has had this intermingling with empire that we have just not talked about a lot. And so coming face to face with that colonization, that complicity within the church is essential to our healing. It's essential to the conversations of how we care for the people of this world, really. But it also means that we, understand the Jesus who is a brown man, the Jesus that, that we get back to understanding who Jesus might be and asking that hard question. And I think also the thing to remember is that decolonization happens when we listen to global indigenous peoples. And so the church can begin to, in navigating this, like you're asking, you're right, it's a personal journey, but it's also a communal journey. So on the personal level, how can we, be listening to these global Indigenous voices? How can we be reading things that are a part of history, reading books by people, kind of understanding that we get to learn these things from them. And then as an institution, that can be harder because we have, institutions have been developed, they've been settled, they've been in their place for such a long time. How can we shift our institutions by asking hard questions together? I think that the questions are always important. Decolonization is not a journey to go on without Indigenous peoples involved. Not involved meaning you just pull an Indigenous person, but involved meaning that you become actively participating and learning the truth about history, learning the truth about these things that have been a part of the church's journey, for all of these years. That also means you can celebrate when things have gone right, when there has been good and there has been justice in the world, when Christianity and other religions have been partners, when there have been, celebrate the good things, but let's grieve and tell the truth about the things that have been covered up for so long. And I always say decolonization is an invitation. I know it's scary. I know that it means for some people, we might lose some things, but then what do we gain? What do we gain in the relationships that we get with each other and with the world?
Thank you. Caitlin, this next question comes from Pastor Mark Olson, and it has to do with this desire that we have as Christians to share our faith and to to share the story of our Lord Jesus Christ, and how that plays into our relationships with Native people in our own region and their the possibility of their involvement in the life of our churches and congregations. In your introduction to Native, you wrote, "Whiteness both forces people into assimilation and rewards those who stay assimilated. How, as members of one of the least racially diverse Christian denominations in America, how can we be church without expecting that our Native neighbors will come to our worship services, join our services, or become more like us? Is it possible to look upon the things we like that are safe for us and see how things can be a threat to those who are resisting assimilation?"
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you've read Native, I share about my journey with all of this, that I grew up deeply entrenched in the Southern Baptist tradition. I was the poster child. I went on all the missions trips. I was complicit, right? I loved being in the purity movement, and then I became a worship leader, and so I very much was in all of this very deeply. That doesn't mean that I didn't care about people, but I think that there was I almost said glitch, but there's something where we're missing and how we care for people and how we have this context of what colonization is, and that's something I've been learning throughout my journey and throughout my own identity and trying to come to terms with this. What's hard for me whenever I try to answer these questions is that I don't know all of your communities, so I can't give you the personal advice of each church or each place, but I do know that, even in my tribe, there are those that would call themselves Christians, and there are those that would not and would never step foot in a church. And so holding the tensions of that, it is difficult, in being the least racially diverse denomination, just to be aware of what you just said, to be aware of the fact that that your church culture can be very threatening and triggering for some people. I think that's even an amazing first step, is just to be aware, to be aware that certain songs or certain things that are a part of the church can be deeply triggering for some people. I think that is a really important thing to even pay attention to, the effects of assimilation, right? That's what the boarding schools were for. They were literally for assimilation. And so when we go through this history, we have to be aware that for some, the church is still a place of deep belonging, and it's a place that holds hope for some Indigenous people, and for others it's a place of deep trauma and triggers, and just being aware of that when you meet someone, when you encounter someone, and again holding space for people to share their stories with you. It's hard for me to give advice of step-by-step things you can do, But like I shared in my talk, just the presence of being humble and just being willing to learn and pay attention is always a good first step, because for so long, Indigenous people have been told who we're supposed to be. We've been told how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to express ourselves. And so to then turn that and say, we acknowledge our assimilation, we acknowledge the colonization that may be here, whether we recognize it or not, and we want to be aware of that, and we want to be aware of how it can affect others, if that makes sense. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks. That makes a lot of sense. And that simple awareness, which is, I would kind of describe it as a baby step, right? But it's also a hard step, because it means recognizing that some parts of our history that we cherish might have also been very destructive to other people.
Right.
And
right.
so it's hard sometimes to embrace that narrative. And so
It is.
I don't-
And I tell people a lot when they're grieving, even I went through this, I had to grieve the America I thought I knew, whenever I was even coming to terms with some things that these things that I had loved about America or loved about Christianity, there's a grief process there. And I never want people to think that it's going to just be an easy switch to start recognizing and learning these things. For anyone, it's going to have sort of a journey of grief attached to it. But that's coming to terms with that. On the other side of that grief is that we belong to each other in a more whole way. And I think that is such a gift. So honor the grief, honor that it is hard, but also like be excited for what comes from all of this journey. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the fears is, work has also been called deconstruction, right? And I think a fear is that after deconstruction, then there'll be nothing left. And is there hope? Can you share that there's hope, that there's something left after deconstruction?
Yes. Yeah, I understand that. And some people, I think, Richard Rohr, if any of you have read Richard Rohr's stuff, he talks a lot about this journey of deconstruction, but then reconstruction, that it's not just breaking everything down to oblivion. Now, there may be a long season where we feel like we're just spinning in space. For some of us, that journey of grief takes a lot longer than others, and that's okay. But then at some point, we're healed enough that we begin to dream again. What do we think the world should look like? I mean, that's what my book is all about. If we're deconstructing these things, decolonizing is a term I use as well. If we're doing this, well, what do we want on the other side? Like, what world are we actually dreaming of? And I think it's important, even in the midst of that deconstruction, or, in digging into these things, that we keep dreaming. Like, don't stop dreaming of what could be, and invite other people into your dreaming, and ask what could come from that. I think that's such a beautiful gift. We don't want to forget that we get to dream and we get to imagine.
Thank you for that. This next question comes from Pastor Crail Stringer, who is a chaplain at Pioneer Care in Fergus Falls. And he's also a passionate advocate for creation care and a leader in our creation care team. And he writes, Caitlin, in your keynote presentation, you touched on the importance of reconnecting with creation for growing one's sense of native identity and sacred belonging with all creatures. I believe a rediscovery of God is intimately tied to this reconnecting with nature. Could you elaborate a little more on this?
Yeah, thank you for asking this. This is something that has become more and more important to me, because what I'm recognizing, even on a very basic level, which I think I mentioned in my talk, is that just, the point of colonization was to disconnect people from the land. There was a connection there that needed to be dismantled for things to run more smoothly, and so we have inherited that. Even whether we recognize it or not, we've inherited a disconnect. And that's really a disembodiment, that our bodies, we were born to be connected to Mother Earth, that we have this gift of creation, this gift of the animals and all the creatures around us, that we get to have this reciprocal relationship of kinship. And so when that's broken, we are broken. There's something in us that will be healed when we begin to heal that relationship to the earth. And I like to do a workshop where I actually ask people to write a letter to Mother Earth. And so if that's something that sounds appealing to you, to write a letter and just name your relationship to her. Say, I've not talked to you in a long time, and I know it's been really hard, but I want to repair this. Or I remember when I was young, I felt this way when I was outside. I would like to remember that again, just to have a conversation with the earth. It can be so healing. And when we're young, there's this curiosity in us, this natural desire to just go outside and dance and play and sing to the wind and talk to trees. And we lose that when we grow up in a lot of ways. Not all of us. Some people hold on to that always, but a lot of us lose it. And so can we find that again? And that's the whole curiosity aspect, is can we grab onto those beautiful gifts of that relationship? And I believe it truly will heal us so much if we begin on that path, because in a lot of our Christian spaces, I grew up with that whole, I get to subdue the earth. And it didn't feel like a relationship. It felt like we're humans, we're awesome, and you're below us. But what if it was more of a, wow, I get to learn from this place that I get to live on? Do you see how that it feels different when we posture ourselves in a different way? And I think that'll be a gift to our faith, that we will, it'll bring us a natural humility to learn from one another and learn from others in a better way, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I can really relate to that personally too. We have a little piece of land that we try to care for, and as I'm doing that, I'm often aware of my alienation, i.e. what I don't know, but probably ought to know about it, and also what I'm learning from it as we engage in that. And it's both humbling and fulfilling work. And by the way, we've been waiting desperately here in northwestern Minnesota for it to actually be nice enough for us to go outside and do that work. And finally.
Sure. Yes.
So, okay. I have one last question, and which is, I've just been told that we are coming to the end of our time here, but my one last question is, I know you're working on something now. Do you want to tell us what you're working on?
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm releasing a new book next year, and it's on everyday resistance. It's on how do we practice resisting the status quo of hate, or the status quo of white supremacy, or some of these things that have inched their way into our society or into our spaces, even if we don't realize it. And so I've created this really beautiful framework for how we recognize these things on all levels of who we are, from the very personal level to the communal level, right? How do we talk about resistance as something we can embody in our daily life? And I'm drawing from so many incredible other authors and teachers to write it. And it's been such a gift. So I hope that it is a gift to all of you. It'll be out next year. And in the meantime, I write at the Liminality Journal, which is my Substack, and I write poetry and essays. And it's just a lovely place to just be, things just feel so heavy all the time. I wanted the Liminality Journal, you can Google that, but I wanted it to just be a place to just kind of rest with words, to just have like a calm place to just sit and take a breath with words. So that's what that space is. So that's what I've been up to.
Thanks so much, Caitlin, and thanks for your work and for your voice. And we'll look forward to that coming book as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
God's peace. And now for the recap of our assembly, we'll turn things over to our illustrious Vice President, Sharon Josephson.
Well, as some of you know from last year, one of the things I like to do is at the end of any meeting that I'm involved with, I like to be able to ask the question, so what did we do? Last year we had 7 resolutions. We could outline all kinds of projects that were potentially going to grow out of that kind of activity. And then this year, we had 1 resolution. So if I were going to go back and give an update or a recap of this assembly, I would have to say that we heard a lot of reports. We heard a lot of reports about things that were going on church-wide, things that are going on in the Synod, and the reason why they were important is because of the action we've taken in the past. We have to monitor and we have to look at the progress we've made. And if we're not making any progress, we have to ask our question, why? That's one of the duties of the people who are the voting members, to look at that and say why. The next item, and this is one that when you go back to coffee at your local congregation, you can say, we talked about money. We talked about the 2 items on the agenda that usually have the least spotlight on them. We talked about compensation guidelines and the importance of keeping our professional staff, those people who are our leaders, that are sitting in those chairs of authority and power, or teaching and instruction, and love and compassion and concern, that we keep in step with the 21st century and not the 20th century. And so when you heard about family leave, and when you heard about the increase in the percentage of compensation, that's an important thing to know, that we are actually valuing those people who work with us and walk with us every day. The other item was the item of the budget. Once again, we usually don't spend a lot of time on the budget, but the budget is important because where we put our money is where we show we have our faith, where we have our whole idea of hope for the future. And one thing that I want to highlight of that is the structure, but the additional above and beyond is those special projects, the special grants that we receive, the special kinds of offerings that we get, the special kinds of fundraising that we do, whether it's on the Synod or on the national level. Those are all important. So that's something you can bring back. The other thing that is highlighted are the speakers who brought good and interesting ideas to us, sometimes made us think. And sometimes I find that the speakers that make you feel a bit uncomfortable and maybe you disagree with and you question, make you think a bit, are those things that you should go back home and talk about and have a discussion. My other 2 items here are, first of all, I would suggest, last year we talked about pray and study and then act. I would suggest this time, if you have questions, first of all, we have 23 trained individuals to help moderate discussions in your local congregations. Invite them. Second thing, invite Bishop Bill for dinner. He likes to eat, I know that, and he's a very good conversationalist, so invite Bishop Bill. He's got a car, he can go anywhere. The second thing that you can do is invite Rebel for coffee. You can have a chat with Janelle. Do all of those things. And in addition to that, say thank you to all of those people in your lives. Here today, we say thank you to Concordia College and their staff. Without them, it would be an entirely different process. We are so fortunate. We have to say thank you to Keith and to Carla for their years of service. We have to say thank you to all the pastors and all the retirees. They gave their life to help us. And then you have to say thank you to the Synod Council. We have 3 retiring members, Pastor Phil Larson, Pastor Ray Noel, and Haley Caulfield.
Roy Noel.
Those, which?
Roy Noel.
Oh, Roy Noel, I'm sorry. Oh, Roy, and I've known you for longer than I've known any of the others. Sorry, Roy. But thank you so very much. Thank you to Bishop Bill, and thank you to the entire staff. Thank you to Julie and Chris. Without you, it just would not work. And I think the theme, we had the theme at the beginning, but I think the key phrase for this was when Bishop Bill gave his report, and one of the things he said was, God, not us. And so if things go well, it's God, not us. So once again, thank you for spending the day with us, and keep us in your prayers. We need every one of them.
We have reached the end, and we thank you for being a part of this work. We know the day was long. In-person Synod assemblies are long too, and we pray blessings as you venture out from here. We are not quite done yet. I have just a couple of quick announcements. At some point today, within probably the next few hours, you will receive an email with a survey, and we appreciate your constructive feedback as we continue to dream and think about what the future assemblies will look like. Also, later this week, you will receive an email from Chris, and that is going to have materials for you to share with your congregation. We want you to continue to share about what is happening, and Sharon has given you some great talking points about sharing about what we have talked about during this very full day. Before we send you and close the assembly, we, at the beginning of this plenary, I asked congregations to share how God is at work in your congregation, and we received some wonderful stories. And so I have written their congregations on here, and I'm going to ask Bishop to come and pick one of them. I would encourage you to go back and look in the comments.
All right.
All right, eyes are closed.
My eyes are closed.
All right, let's see. All right, Good Shepherd in Clearbrook, and they have done a discerning process as they are calling a new staff person, and so we pray for you and that discerning process, and thank you for sharing how God is at work at Good Shepherd in Clearbrook. So you have Caitlin Curtis's book coming. You have an old Lutheran baggage team, because all Lutherans have baggage. Nell Jane, love God, love people. The end. Amen. And a few other treats. We also have 2 more Consecrate boxes to give away, and we are excited to give them to Valjean Severson. You are going to get one of these Consecrate boxes, and Pastor Amber Kalina. Thank you for what you both are doing in our synod, and we hope this Consecrate box will bless you. So we are ready to close out the assembly, and I invite Bishop Bill back up.
Thank you, Deacon Julie. So we'll have the closing of the assembly. We've come to the end. I want to thank you for your wise and diligent participation, for the stories that you shared and the ways that you encouraged one another and us in the chat and in other ways with text messages and emails. Thank you so much. It is indeed a delight and an honor to be in ministry and mission with you. So, if we could bring up the slides for the closing of the assembly, thank you. I invite you to join me. Jesus said, "You will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. I chose you and appointed you to bear fruit that will last. Remember," said Jesus, "I will be with you always." The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Direct us, O Lord God, in all our doings, with your most gracious favor, and extend to us your continual help, that in all of our works, begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally, by your mercy, bring us to everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen. I declare this assembly closed in the name of the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sanctifier. Amen. Go in peace, share the good news. Thanks be to God.
love.